Hello, everyone, and I thank you all for tuning in to another week of Insights of a Survivor. First, I want to give a trigger warning. This episode um, will have content related to domestic violence, intimate partner homicide, child abuse, and systematic failure. If the subject is too heavy for you right now, please listen with care or come back when you're ready and you feel safe emotionally, mentally, and physically. That's always the first thing that we're concerned about is your safety. And even if you have to push pause and step away and come back and watch it on replay, if you can't, just put yourself first. Okay, so just putting that out there. So again, welcome to today's episode of Insights of a Survivor. My name is PJ, and before we begin, I want to, you know, offer a moment of pause, a breath of intention, and a space of reverence for the lives that we're about to acknowledge tonight. Because tonight's episode is going to be a really, really heavy one. It's about victims of domestic violence who never got the chance to escape because their stories ended way too soon. We often celebrate survivors, and we should celebrate survivors. They found the strength within themselves or the resilience within themselves to escape something that is horrific. But survival isn't always guaranteed. Some never made it out. Some were silenced before they could even whisper for help. This isn't an easy conversation, but it's a necessary one. We're not here to sensationalize these stories. We're here to honor them and to remember and to fight harder for those who are still here, for those who are still trapped, and for those who we haven't lost. I'm sorry, this is a really touchy subject for me. These stories are brutal, but they are very real. They are stories of women, children, and even men whose cries we've ignored, whose warning signs were missed, and whose lives were stolen, often by someone that they once trusted, loved, or lived with. These are the truths that don't get told enough on airtime, but we refuse to let them be forgotten. I refuse to let them be forgotten. Every statistic represents a life, a purpose, a dream, a person with a name. These were not just victims, they were artists, teachers, daughters, friends, songs, inside jokes, quiet hopes for their futures. And in many cases, the system meant to protect them failed them. Police reports were ignored, restraining orders were violated, shelters full, friends unsure what to do, society silent. This episode matters because their stories are not over. Not if we keep telling them. Not if we let their legacies become fuel for change. Not if we use their truths to build better laws, stronger safety nets, and more compassionate communities. I need you to know something as we begin. The pain in these stories, they're deep, but so is the urgency. The only way we can protect those who are still living in fear is first by facing the reality of those who didn't survive. We will say their names, we will hear their truths, and we will carry the weight of their silence, not as a burden, but as a responsibility. You guys are going to hear it rain. I don't know why tonight is just a thunder is coming because they know, the universe knows it's about to happen right now. So take a breath, ground yourself, and listen, not just with your ears, but with your heart. Because remembering them is a way we resist the silence. And in this space, I believe, and we believe, your story doesn't end in pain, it begins in power. So let's begin. So, when I decided to talk about domestic violence, and when we often talk about domestic violence, we focus on survival, on getting out, on healing, on thriving, on surviving, and on living this life past trauma and abuse. But what about those who didn't get the chance to get out? Let me talk about them today. Ayaja Zubair. I'm not gonna say this name right. I know it's Ayaja Zubar Hassan. I'm sorry again for the family if I disrespect. I don't really mean to disrespect her name. But in 2009, I'm gonna say her name is Asia. It might be in Asia. But Miss Hassan, a 37-year-old Pakistani American woman, was murdered in her home in Buffalo, New York, by her husband. She wasn't a stranger to the community. She helped co found a television network meant to counter negative Muslim stereotypes. It's called British TV. Her husband, Muzamil, I can't, Muzzammil, but his last name is Hassan. He was the CEO. She had filed for divorce about 6 days before her death. She had also filed multiple reports of domestic abuse over the years. Friends and colleagues have seen bruises. They've seen signs of withdrawal. They just seen her changing in the situation. But like many survivors, she tried to stay for the sake of peace, family, and for her faith. Then on February 12th, 2009, she was beheaded by her husband at the network's headquarters. That that was a lot. That was a very brutal act, and it's honestly very shocking. But what was more important was that she had done everything right. That was the most shocking part. She'd done everything right. She filed for a divorce. She sought help, and yet the system still failed to protect her. This case wasn't widely covered beyond the initial headlines, and in some circles, it was dismissed as an honor killing, distancing it from the epidemic of domestic violence. But at its core, it was domestic violence homicide, one that was foreseeable and one that was preventable. Cheryl Baldwin, Sherelle Baldwin, I'm sorry. Let's shift the lens for a moment. In 2013, Miss Sherelle Baldwin, a 21-year-old black woman, a mother in Connecticut, from Connecticut, was being stalked and harassed by her ex-boyfriend. She had a restraining order, and he had broken into her home before. Then one day he climbed through her window, and she was afraid for her life and the life of her children. In a desperate attempt to defend herself, she did. She killed him. And you know what happened after she defended herself? She was arrested and charged with murder and spent 3 years in prison before being acquitted at a retrial. So a restraining order is meant to protect us. And when we do everything right and we defend ourselves, she goes to jail. She has to spend 3 years away from her children before she's finally acquitted. This is not just a story of loss, it's a story of how the systems punish black women for trying to survive. It makes us wonder. It makes me wonder, at least. I hope it makes everyone else wonder. How many more have to die because they don't fight back or get criminalized when they do? Like, how many of us have to die or go to jail for defending ourselves? So there's another case that I want to talk about. Casera stops. Casera stops pretty places. I don't know if that's her name. That could be, but it was an 18-year-old woman, indigenous woman. Okay, that could be her name. Casera stops pretty places. So I apologize if anybody's offended by that. Um, an 18-year-old indigenous woman from Crow and Northern Cheyenne Nations. From the Crow and Northern Cheyenne Nations, she was found dead August 2019 in Hardin, Montana. Her body was discovered in the backyard, but no autopsy was conducted for days. Her death was labeled suspicious, yet no investigation followed. Her family begged for answers, they begged for justice. But in this case, this was one of hundreds of missing, murdered indigenous women cases that remain unresolved or ignored. So, I mean, that goes to show you, like, it doesn't stop. She was smart, athletic, and had dreams of becoming a lawyer. But now she's a name on the list, and her death shows what happens when an entire community, when entire communities are systematically erased from safety and justice. So it does take a toll on children as well. I said we're going to talk about everything, you guys. So in May of 2019, Ava Castillo, just 10 years old, was killed by her mother's ex-boyfriend in San Antonio, Texas. Her mother, Amanda, had a restraining order. She had made 5 police reports in the 6 weeks leading up to the murder. He got into her home, he got into their home, and he murdered Ava right in front of her mom. This is a child gone, a mother traumatized, and a system that once again did too little, too late. Ava wasn't the abuser's target. She wasn't. She was just a bystander. But domestic violence often doesn't end with just the victim. Children, relatives, even friends and coworkers, they are at risk of this ripple effect, this deadly ripple effect. These are not just isolated cases. These are patterns of ignored cries, of broken protections, of lives lost because someone decided they weren't worth listening to. And they didn't have to die. That's the worst part, is they did not have to die. Asia died despite following every step we're told to follow. Sherelle was punished for surviving. Kasira was forgotten by the justice system. Ava was a child who paid the ultimate price for the inaction of the justice system. Every time the system fails, it's not just a policy failure, it's a life failure. And those failures are still happening today, every single day. So when someone says, why didn't she just leave? You need to remember something. Sometimes they tried, sometimes they couldn't, sometimes they did and they died anyway. So, it's not just as simple as just leave. Next, we're going to talk about how we as a community can do better to advocate for these families. Do better as a community, as friends, as advocates, as a family, because awareness is not just enough. Action, action is the only thing, sorry, allergies again, that saves lives. So let's talk about the red flags, the signs that there were some things going on that we should have noticed, sometimes for years, sometimes not, but they weren't taken seriously, or they were dismissed, or they were hidden behind a forced smile, or a long sleeve, or a quiet excuse. One of the most dangerous myths that we in society carry is that abuse always looks like bruises, black eyes, and busted lips and broken bones, and that's it. That's the only obvious sign, is when it's violent or explosive or loud. But abuse begins in silence, in small, calculated ways, and it builds. It might start with isolation, just cutting someone off from their friends, from their family, or even if it's a job. They might not want this person or their loved ones to work. It might look like financial control, keeping the victim dependent or unable to access money or resources. So they won't let them to get a job, because if you do get a job, you may be able to save money to leave me. It might be coercive control, constant monitoring, manipulation, humiliation, or threats, anything. And sometimes it looks like love, jealousy disguised as passion, control disguised as protection. And by the time it turns physical, the victim may already feel trapped, their self worth shattered, and the support system just gone. Now, you might ask again, why don't they just leave? But seriously, Seriously, that question kind of gets under my skin. It does. It really annoys me because that question itself holds blame. The better question is, why is it so hard to escape? You guys should be asking, have you tried to leave? Yes? No? If you can't leave, what's going on? Is everything okay? Why is it so hard to leave? Because that could be a sign itself. They may want to leave. They may not be able to leave. And the answers are layered: fear, retaliation, fear of being killed, fear of losing their children, fear of shame. They might internalize blame, reinforced by a society that judges victims for staying. They might be dependent on them financially, emotionally, physically, and sometimes they have no home to go to. They have nowhere to go, no money, no one they can trust, no one that will help them. Systematic failure. I mean, victims often try to leave. They really do. And they are met with closed doors, clogged courts, overworked caseworkers, officers who say, well, there's not much we could do here. I mean, I've gone through that for so many years. Seriously, my ex-husband has done some things to me. They've seen me with bruises, with scratches, with hand marks around my throat, and they'll say that that's not enough to take them, and we'll just write a report. And if the DA decides to pick it up, then that's what they'll do. I mean, you know how many times they let that man come back in the house, and they have obviously seen me be abused by this man, and that's just horrible. And sometimes the most dangerous time for a victim is when they do try to leave. Let's look at some numbers. According to the CDC, over 50% of all female homicide victims in the US are killed by current or former intimate partners. That's more than half. And that's not a coincidence, that's a crisis. Now, let's go a little deeper than that. Black women are disproportionately affected by those numbers. They experience intimate partner violence at a higher rate and are less likely to be believed and more likely to be misclassified in death reports. Accidental death this, accidental that. It's overlooked. The media rarely says their names at all. They never, ever, ever. I mean, I'm going to say never. Like I say, rarely. They rarely say their names. Their stories are always underreported. Their pain is often invisible until it's fatal. And when they do seek help, the face of racial biases is in policing. I'm sorry, I'm getting upset. The face of racial bias is in policing, discrimination, and in housing and employment. So that's what I'm saying. They policing. They look at you as someone. Oh, he's just gonna let him back. They discriminate for housing. They make it hard for you to find housing, for employment, for you to leave, for you to move on. And a cultural narrative that says we don't talk about these things. So that means that what goes on in our house stays in our house. That's our doing, teaching each other that we keep our business in our house. So how do we do better? We stop treating abuse as a private issue and start calling it for what it is: a public health emergency. We fund shelters. You know how many times I have been trying to get away from my ex-husband, trying to go to a domestic violence or a battered women and children's shelter, and I could not get in because they were so overcrowded and underfunded. They didn't have anywhere to place me, so I had to stay in this house and try to find a way, because he wouldn't let us have a phone, to sneak to someone's house every day to call the shelter to see if they had a bed for me, for my children. We need to fund these shelters so that they can create more beds. We listen when survivors speak. We hold acute abusers accountable even when they wear a badge, a collar, or a smile. So many times I had to hear, "Oh yeah, I can't tell that he's that way. He's really cool. He's really chill. He's really this. He's really that." That's what he is with you. That's what he wants you to see. That's the mask he wears for you. Because when he takes that mask off, I'm the one that has to see that monster in our home. We need to train law enforcement, judges, and social workers to recognize non physical abuse, to believe survivors, and to act swiftly. And as friends and family, neighbors, and co workers, we don't look away. We check in, we stay available. We believe people the first time they say that they're scared. And when they do go back, because sometimes they will go back, we will love them without judgment. So they know they can come to us again and again and again if that's what it takes. Because no one should have to navigate through survival alone. These these red flags, they're not small. They weren't invisible. They were ignored. And that's on us as a society, as advocates, as friends, to make sure that doesn't happen or that doesn't keep happening. We need to do better. Let this not just be another conversation. Let it be a wake up call. We often hear the same heartbreaking phrase after someone loses their life to domestic violence. There were signs. I knew I should have paid attention to this. I saw this happening. She didn't act the same. He started to become this way. They started to act that way. Those signs are missed, dismissed, or minimized until it's too late. Today, we're going to sit with the discomfort of those red flags. We're going to talk about the early warning signs, the reasons victims often can't leave, and how the very systems that are supposed to protect people, law enforcement, courts, child welfare, often ends up re-traumatizing or outright failing them. Because if we don't participate, if we don't talk about it, we're just as complicit in it. So let's start with the early signs. Red flags and abuse, relationships, they kind of don't always, again, they don't always come up with bruises. In fact, many of them start out as what people mistake for intense love or affection. Constant texting, blowing up my phone. Where are you at? When are you coming home? Well, how long are you going to be? Why? Who are you talking to? Who is that on you on the phone with? They often take that as, oh, he loves you. Oh, she's jealous. When it's really a red flag that you should be watching out for. Like, okay, you're being a little bit overbearing and over possessive. Wanting to know where you are at all times. I need to know when you leave, how long it's going to take you to get here, where you're going to go in between, how long are you going to stay there. Like, that's controlling. Saying things like, I love you so much that I cannot stand to be apart from you. It might be cute, but that could be a red flag that this person may have some underlying issues that we may pay attention to. How much love do you really need? You can't ever be apart from someone. They can't work. They can't go to the bathroom. They can't visit their mother or their sister without you having to always be there at every second of every time. Like, that's not safe. Getting angry when you spend time with friends or family. I had to go through that. I would go to see my sister, and trust and believe, when I got home, it was an issue of he would never do anything while I was over there. If he wasn't there, because he would want to come. And my sister, she didn't like my ex-husband, so he wasn't welcome in their home. And when I went to see her, it was a huge problem. Isolating you from support systems. That was his way of keeping me from someone who would fight for me if I needed to get away from him, who wasn't afraid to tell him, you're not going to come over here and try to remove her from this home. So you want to isolate me from someone that will have my back if I need it. Quick escalations and like moving in together, proposing too soon, like always wanting to take it to the next step. Like, I just met you 6 months ago. Why do you want to marry me? Or pushing for a commitment before someone else is ready. Trying to get you, let's talk about having kids. Okay, we just met last month. Let's see where this is going to go. Jealousy marked as protection. Jealousy is cute. Anything in little could be looked at as cute. But when it starts to become aggressive or violent, that is a problem. And eventually it escalates to things like monitoring phone uses, controlling your money, whether you're the one working or not, belittling you in private or sometimes in public, explosive anger followed by love bombing, calling you every name under the sun, and then afterwards telling you how much they love you, buying you flowers, apologizing for everything that they did wrong, but you just humiliated me in front of the world. Threats, intimidation, or destruction of property. These are not personality quirks. They're not just flaws in this person. This is these are tactics of power and control. And the most dangerous time in an abusive relationship is when the victim tries to leave. So why don't they just leave? That's the question society throws around far too casually, especially if you don't understand or you don't know. So let's answer it honestly. Leaving is not always safe. In fact, a woman is 70 times more likely to be killed in the 2 weeks after leaving than at any other time in the relationship. And it's not just fear, there are layers. Financial dependence. If someone doesn't have access to money, where are they supposed to go? If you're judging them and they don't feel right coming to you, they don't have a job because this person will not allow them to work, and they have nowhere else to go, especially if they have children. Where are they supposed to go? They don't have money for a hotel, to buy them another car, to get around, for childcare, to do anything that they need to do to start over. What are they supposed to do? And you're not willing to help them. You just want to judge them. So where are they supposed to go? Leaving children involved, if there's children involved, leaving can mean losing custody or putting your children in more danger. Immigration status. Many survivors are threatened with deportation if they reach out for help. If you are an American citizen and you are in a relationship with someone who is not, that is horrible to threaten them with deportation, but I've actually seen that happen. So I've known people personally who've had to live in a very unhappy relationship because they were afraid of deportation by the person that they were in a relationship with. Disability. Some rely on their abusers to care for them. And if they take that care away from them and they feel like they don't have anyone else to go to, what are they supposed to do? And then there are cultural and religious pressures. In some communities, divorce or separation is shamed and abuse is normalized. So, what are you supposed to do when you have a whole culture, a whole religious belief pressuring you to stay in a very toxic relationship? I was like that. You married him. My family is religious, big, 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 big religious, church going people, and you married him. I married him because I was being shamed for having a child out of wedlock in the first place. I didn't even want to get married, but it was because of the religious pressures that I married him in the first place. Now it's religious pressures telling me that I shouldn't be getting a divorce. Like, so it's a lot. It's a lot. Lack of shelter space. Now, again, that is one of my biggest issues. I have, in multiple states, tried to find shelter just to get away. And many cities have a wait list or turn survivors away because they have no room. Or some shelters will not allow boys. If you have sons, they will not allow you in the shelter because they are trying to be protective of young girls that are in the shelter, which is fine. But then you should have a space for single parents who have sons. Right now, there's a situation with single fathers. There are so many single fathers, more and more every day. They have no support, no shelters in place for single fathers. And that is something that is just horrible. There's no legal protection, even with a restraining order. Enforcement is often very weak. I had 5 restraining orders on my ex husband. They took him to jail one time with 5 restraining orders over 10 years, maybe 5 to 10 years of me constantly getting restraining orders. And it finally took for them to take him to jail for violating his restraining order. So no, it's not that they didn't leave. It's the it's that the options are just not there. The options of safety is never really there. You're just there. You're stuck between a rock and a hard place. You're in a situation where if I go, I am going to make the situation worse. And that brings us to the systems of that fail survivors every single day. Okay, we're going to talk about law enforcement. When a survivor calls for help, they're often met with skepticism, impatience, or just kind of dismissing you. Sometimes the officers they will come and say things like, you don't, like I told you, you don't have enough evidence. It's just a domestic situation. Let's just calm down. It's just a domestic situation. It's like, what? Or I've even gotten asked, well, why did you go back to them? Sir, first of all, I didn't go back to them. In some cases, he left my home and he broke into my home. I did not allow him in my home. He broke in. But because he's telling you she let me in, you're going to automatically assume that I'm lying and take his word for it. And those reports are ignored. Calls go unanswered, or worse, they both get arrested just to be safe. And the courts, restraining orders are filed, but I mean, they don't guarantee any protection. They really don't. In fact, more than 20% of women killed by intimate partners had active protective orders or restraining orders on the other party at the time of their death. They followed the rules. They trusted the process, and it failed them. And child welfare, I worked for them, and too often victims are blamed. If a child witnesses abuse, agencies might say that the survivor is failing to protect them, putting pressure on parents trying to escape instead of the ones that's causing the harm. So let's kind of take a moment and sit with some of the statistics. Over 50% of female homicide victims in the United States are killed by current or former intimate partners. I said that to you once before. Over half of the women killed in the United States are killed by their former or current intimate partner, their lover, someone that they are in love with, or who they thought they were in love with, and who they either tried to leave or wanted to leave and they couldn't. That means over half of all women murdered in this country, they have been failed by the system. And now let's just talk about racial differences. Black women are nearly 3 times more likely to be killed by a partner than white women. And that's just the facts. They're also less likely to be believed. They are more likely to be more criminalized. I was arrested one time when the police came out. And they're less likely to have their deaths labeled correctly. I know I said all of this before, but I want to get this point out there because I need you guys to understand that this is serious. This is very serious. We need to be taken more seriously. And not to say that any race deserves domestic violence. I mean, any type of violence or death put on them. But these are the facts. Many incidents are reported as isolated incidents or random acts, even though there's a clear pattern that abuse existed. And now I'm going back to deaths in Black women. They are reported as isolated incidents when they're not, or random acts. Even though I've called the police on this man 30 times in 2 months, how is this a random act or an isolated incident? Because you guys didn't do what you were supposed to do. And for Indigenous women, they face some of the highest rates of intimate partner violence and homicide in the U.S. And yet many of their cases remain unsolved or uninvestigated. The systems are failing us. And the failures are not neutral. They are racialized, they are gendered, and they are deadly. And I don't know what we need. Well, I do know what we need to do now. I'm sorry. Like I said, this is a very sensitive topic. So what can we do? As a community, we have to start listening. We have to create real safety networks. We have to create maybe riding options, shelter, financial support. We cannot just look away. Or we cannot. We cannot just look away or assume that someone else will take care of it. As advocates, we need to push for legislation that centers survivor safety, demand laws that enforce officers to receive trauma informed training, fund not only shelters but mental health resources as well, decriminalize survival so that victims have the right to fight back. Let me say that in a way that makes you understand. The example I gave earlier, the woman was obviously in a domestically violent situation. She had restraining orders on this guy. He broke into her house, and for her safety, she killed this man. Instead of her going to jail for surviving, she should have been allowed, they should have understood that she was in a situation of survival and should never have been punished. If someone breaks into your house and tries to shoot you and your family and you kill them, that is considered self defense and you will not go to prison for that. Or if you do, you get like a slap on the wrist. You will not lose 3 years of your life. But this woman killed a man for doing exactly that, and she was criminalized for that. So that's what decriminalize survival, so that victims who fight back are not punished. As friends, as family, do not judge, do not give ultimatums, offer support without pressure. Listen, document these incidents. Be ready to help make a plan. And when someone tells you something is wrong, don't wait. Don't wait until it escalates to believe them. Don't wait until she comes to you so beaten up that she can't even open her eyes because her eyes, she has to, they're swollen shut. The red flags are there. They've always been there. But unless we get serious about responding to them, unless we hold the systems accountable, unless we value every life and stop normalizing violence, then we would then continue to read names after the fact. We are not powerless. We are responsible because behind every why didn't she or he or they leave, there's usually a why didn't anyone help? And when you look at the patterns, the signs, the statistics, you realize something very, very, very unsettling. The danger wasn't even hidden, it was ignored. So let's do better. Let's act sooner. Let's refuse to stay silent when the red flags are starting to wave in our face because we see them. We just choose to ignore them. And when we talk about domestic violence, many think of just direct abuse to the victim, between the victim and the abuser. But the truth is far more complicated than that, and it's really far more devastating. Domestic violence isn't just something that happens in an isolation, it affects everyone involved. It's like a ripple effect that goes outward and it touches children, family, friends, neighbors, entire communities. Sometimes these bystanders become victims themselves. They get caught in the crossfire and they often become a target for trying to help. So today I'm kind of going to explore the reality of when bystanders become victims. The children killed in domestic violent homicides, family members targeted for protecting victims, and the impact on the communities. And that's why it's crucial for all of us to kind of stick together and understand this. So let's start with the hardest part: children. Children every year in the US, hundreds of them die as a result of domestic violence. These aren't abstract statistics, these are lives brutally cut short take that heartbreaking case of Gabrielle, Gabby Petito, whose disappearance and, and her death in 2021 drew national attention. Gabby herself was not a victim of domestic violence, but it represents a larger truth about the children in these situations. While Gabby was an adult, the dangers extended deeply to the children living in the homes. And more tragically, consider the Clark family murders in Sydney in Australia in 2020, a case where three young children, Aaliyah, Lanaya, and Trey, were deliberately killed by their father, Rowan Baxter. These cases kind of shook the world, but it also revealed a grim pattern. These children were not just collateral damage, they were primary victims. And the U.S. Welfare Information Gateway reports that approximately 50% of children homicides occur in the context of domestic violence. Often the children are targeted because they're with their abused parents, or sometimes because the abuser seeks to exert control or punishment over the victim through the children. One chilling example is a case, Jennifer and her children, that they lived in Maryland, and this was in 2023. This woman, Jennifer, she left an abusive relationship, but put her ex partner in danger. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Her ex partner put her in danger, fatally shooting Jennifer and their 3 month old. This is just really hard to. It's a trigger for me, so I have to do my processing work because I was in those situations. Some of these situations I was in, my children were involved, and it takes you back. So I have to sit back for a minute and kind of reset myself. Jennifer left her abusive relationship, and her ex partner shot her and the 3 month old infant while she was holding the baby. This tragic murder, it kind of devastated the whole community. It was a murder suicide, and it highlighted how children not only suffer physically but psychologically in domestic violent environments. The trauma inflicted on children exposed to domestic violence, even if not physically harmed, can last a lifetime. It can manifest in ways of PTSD, depression, behavioral problems, and increased risk of perpetuating the cycle of abuse. Friends and family, they're also targets of domestic violence. They're not only just passive witnesses, sometimes they can become victims because they choose to intervene in an attempt to help, or are simply seen as obstacles in the way of the abuser. Like I have a friend who she would let me come and live with her. She let me come and live with her. She was somebody who was an obstacle. Another friend, she's told my ex-husband flat out, I'm not going to stop being her friend just because you don't want me to. And she became a target for him. He couldn't stand her. But there's a case, Amber McDonald, a survivor who shared her story publicly. When Amber's family tried to help her escape, her abuser retaliated violently, attacking a family member or family members who supported Amber. These assaults served as a terrifying reminder that domestic violence is not just a private issue, it's a community one. And the risk often extends to those who try to stand up for victims. Equally, in the tragic story of the Peterson family in Oregon in 2019, the father murdered his estranged wife and her brother, who had come to intervene to help de-escalate a fight. This highlights how the risks extends to friends and family when they're trying to protect their loved ones. Even neighbors have been targeted for calling the police. This dynamic creates a climate of fear when it comes to people who want to help. This is what causes the hesitation and inadvertently allowing abuse to continue unchecked. But it does have an impact on the community. And the impact doesn't stop at individuals or family. It kind of moves its way through the entire community. When violence erupts in the household, schools, workplaces, neighborhoods, and social circles, they're all affected. Children from violent homes often struggle in school, leading to increased dropout rates, behavioral issues, and long term economic disadvantages. Adults who witness or know about violence may experience heightened anxiety, depression, or even develop some form of PTSD. So consider the ripple effect in small or tight knit communities. The stigma of domestic violence, fear of retaliation, and lack of support and resources often silence victims and bystanders. A report by the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence showed that nearly 20 million women and 10 million men have experienced some form of intimate partner violence in their lifetime, but countless more live in fear, unable to speak out. Fear that comes from witnessing or experiencing violence damages communities, trust, the damages community trust, leading to isolation and fractured relationships. So, what can we take from all of this? I said a whole lot in a very small amount of time. What can we take from all this? When we say domestic violence, it's not always just behind closed doors. It ripples into entire families and communities, and sometimes tragically ending in the lives of children, friends, and those brave enough to intervene, as well as the victims themselves. We must remember that domestic violence is a public health crisis that affects everyone. Each bystander harmed is a reminder of a collective responsibility we share to educate, support, and protect those at risk. We can do better. When we face the harsh reality that domestic violence extends beyond the immediate victim, affecting children, friends, and community, the question then becomes, what can we do? How can we move from awareness to meaningful change? How do we stop these ripples of violence from spreading? So, this is what we're going to talk about hope, because we can do better. We have to do better because change begins with knowledge. And many people don't understand that it's complicated, the complex dynamics of domestic violence. They see it as a private dispute or a momentary argument, but domestic violence is a pattern of power and control, and it is often hidden behind closed doors and societal silence. And we just have seen why, because a lot of people are afraid of it affecting them in their life. Because again, sometimes the victim of domestic violence is not necessarily the victim of domestic violence. Community workshops and school programs implementing comprehensive education programs in schools and communities can teach people, especially the youth, about healthy relationships, about consent, and how to recognize abuse early on. Sharing real stories from survivors and bystanders can help break down the stigma and build empathy. Programs like the Empowered Voices podcast itself can play a critical role here. It's giving faces and names and statistics. So we also need to train our first responders, you guys, because I told you a lot of times when I call the police out, the lack of empathy, some of the most insensitive, dehumanizing, embarrassing comments that I received was from the police who were supposed to be there to help me get away from this abusive situation. So police officers, social workers, and healthcare providers need specialized training to recognize abuse. As a caseworker myself, I have had to complete trauma informed training, but that was because I was specifically working in those fields. But when I'm working as a case manager for someone who's just looking for a job, I don't get that kind of training. And everyone needs specialized training to recognize signs of abuse and how to respond with sensitivity and connect with victims and provide them with resources effectively. The system is designed to protect, it needs to be designed to protect victims often, and they don't do that. They don't. They fall short. Too many times, survivors are just ignored. Their cries, their pleas, the restraining orders, the ineffectiveness, the child welfare services that kind of abuses or blames the parent who's the victim as well. Law enforcement reform, we need to kind of hold the police accountable for not handling the situations correctly when they go out on domestic violence call. This includes them having to take mandatory domestic violence training, trauma informed and response protocols, and ensuring that officers take reports seriously and not just dismiss them as private matters or isolated incidents. And especially if you've been to my house 5 times, it's not an isolated incident. They need to create better protective orders because too often restraining orders are false security. There should be more resources to enforce these restraining orders effectively or protection orders effectively and quicker. They need to have more legal pathways to intervene before a violence begins to escalate. Because honestly, it took my ex-husband pouring gasoline on my house and trying to set it on fire with me and my children in that home before they finally acknowledged that he violated the restraining order. And child welfare collaboration. Those agencies, they need to work together and collaborate across disciplines to protect the children. When domestic violence is reported, child protective services should be protective, providing safety plans, counseling, and monitoring for the parent to be able to protect the child involved. Instead of accusing the parent of neglecting or putting the child in a bad situation when they themselves can't get out of that situation, like what are they supposed to do? Survivors and their families often face huge barriers when trying to escape abuse, from lack of shelter to financial constraints to emotional isolation. Shelters are life saving because when I finally was able to get into a shelter, it worked wonders for me. But they're often overcrowded, and we need more shelters. We need more shelters with the capacity to house not only women, but also children, men, and LGBTQ plus individuals, pets, anyone affected. There are so many restrictions that make it hard for individuals who are in these situations to get assistance, accessible counseling, and mental health care. The trauma that domestic violence has affects everyone, and it requires long term mental health support for survivors and children, and those victims may not always be able to afford that. Community programs should offer free or low cost therapy with culturally competent providers. You hear what I said? Culturally competent, because not everyone understands all cultures. There are things about certain cultures that I can't tell you about, so I shouldn't be handling someone in a certain culture unless I have been trained in how to do that. Legal assistance. They have legal assistance, but it is severely lacking, and many victims cannot afford legal representation to navigate custody battles, divorce, or restraining orders in a way that will help them. So, funding for legal aid organizations can bridge that gap. But even though there are legal aid communities, or not communities, programs, they're extremely lacking. They don't help. Everyone has a role in ending domestic violence. When friends, neighbors, co-workers, and community leaders take action, the impact multiplies. Bystander intervention training, which is teaching the community members how to safely intervene, whether it's calling authorities, providing support to victims, or de-escalating situations that can save lives. Programs like Green Dot or Safe Date offers models like this. And we need more programs like this to help this community learn and understand how to stay safe and still help. And we need to encourage people to create networks of trust around their survivors. Friends who check in regularly, coworkers who notice changes in behaviors, and a community member who advocates for resources. So we also need to recognize that domestic violence affects all cultures, but cultural barriers sometimes prevent victims from seeking help. Providing culturally sensitive services and outreach in diverse communities is very, very important. And policy and advocacy and legislative change is something that is very, very important, and it requires transforming the laws and policies that govern how domestic violence is handled. Funding for prevention programs, the government needs to allocate more funding for prevention programs that educate us. Financial dependence is one of the most significant barriers when preventing victims from leaving. So, job training and employment programs that provide victims with job skills and opportunities to achieve economic independence. Grants or emergency funds that can help survivors afford housing, transportation, childcare, and other essentials during these transitions. That's something that's very much lacking. So to amplify survivor voices and leaderships is very profound. That's something that is needed. That gives us insight into what works and what doesn't. Survivor-led organizations that are support and fund groups led by survivors that offer peer counseling, advocacy, and education. These are things that we can do to help in this epidemic, this crisis. Public platforms need to create space for survivors to share their stories on social media, like my podcast or my summits, or either other community events that shifts public perception from victimhood to resilience and leadership, so that individuals who don't understand that there are lights at the end of the tunnel can see that you can get out, you can be free, and you have the ability to get your voice back. We need to build more passionate communities beyond programs and beyond programs and policies. It's about like how we relate to others every day. We need to end victim blaming. We need to encourage a cultural shift from blaming victims for their abuse. We also need to promote empathy and support to let survivors know that they're not alone and that they are believed and they are supported. Create safe spaces, whether it's a faith group, workplace, or neighborhood circles that offer, environments where victims feel safe to speak up and they can make a difference. That can make a really big difference to so many, because a lot of times victims feel alone. Real world example of progress. Look at Austin. I lived in Austin for years and they implemented a domestic violence coordinated community response, and they combined police reform, community education, victim services, and data tracking. And since the implementation of this, Austin has seen measurable drops in domestic violence, repeat offenses, and improved survivor satisfaction with services. Or the Safe at Home program in multiple states that protects victims, addresses from that they address things from public records to prevent stalkers from locating them. And then the simple, but it's kind of powerful, because like a lot of times I went to hide and he found me. So I said that all wrong, because again, this is very, very frustrating me. But there is a program that protects victims' addresses from public records to prevent stalkers from locating them. There we go. But that does save lives. I mean, I've left states, you guys. I've moved to the state twice trying to run from my ex-husband, and every time. So we all have a role to play. Whether you're a survivor, a friend, a family member, a community led leader, or an advocate, your voice and your actions matter. You need to learn the signs, educate others, support survivors, hold the systems accountable, and demand change. Because every life that is lost to domestic violence, including those of the bystanders, is a call to action for us. As we come to this deeply important part of today's episode, I invite you to pause, because I need to pause, breathe, and prepare your hearts and minds for the rest of this episode. It looks like it's going to run a little longer tonight, you guys, as this is a moment for you to honor those whose lives were cut short by domestic violence, those whose voices were silenced too soon, whose stories may have never been fully heard. It is our responsibility to remember them, not just as statistics, as individuals with dreams, with families, and legacies that still impact us today. So, this part is a tribute to them as a sacred space to say their names, acknowledge their lives, and honor their memories. So, when we say their names, we refuse to let their stories fade into silence. Each name carries a life, a history, a ripple of impact on families, friends, and communities. I will read names of some women and children and men who have lost their lives to domestic violence. These names are drawn from verified reports and memorials to victims who have been known publicly. Please know this is nowhere near as many people that have been affected by this, but these are just random names. Atiana Jefferson, killed in 2009 during a police incident in Texas while at home with her nephew. Marissa Alexander, though not a homicide victim, her story highlights the harsh treatment of survivors defending themselves, reminding us of the silent struggles. Tamika Stewart, a black woman killed by her former partner. Her case brought attention to the systematic failures in law enforcement response. Michelle Gardner Quinn, killed in 2013 by an intimate partner. Her death inspired college campus safety reforms. Lorena Escalante, a mother of three killed in 2020. Her name is remembered in immigrant communities advocating for domestic violence awareness. Christopher Lee, one of the men who died trying to protect a loved one from domestic violence. Jessica Hernandez, killed in 2018. Her case helped push for stronger stalking laws. These are only a handful of names among thousands each year. Every single one represents a life that deserves respect, remembrance, and justice. So let me take a moment to honor one of these lives more deeply. Atiana Jefferson. Atiana was a 28-year-old woman with a bright future. She was loved by her family, including her young nephew, with whom she was spending time with when she was killed at the night in Atlanta. I mean, not in Atlanta, in her community. I'm sorry. Atiana's death shocked communities across the country and sparked conversations about the intersection of domestic violence, law enforcement, and racial justice. She was a caregiver, a sister, a daughter, a friend. Her life was full of promise and warmth. Her family described her as a protective, kind soul who brought light to everyone she met. Though her life was stolen too soon, her name is now a rallying cry for justice, reform. So thank you so much, Tatiana. We will not forgive you. We will not forget you. Um, and she is not someone who is just one. There are so many stories that match her story of someone who has been a victim of domestic violence and who has been silenced because we are not listened to, we are not heard, we are not understood, we are overlooked, we are underserved, we are devalued, we are told that because we go back that there's a problem, and it's something that we should pay attention to so much. Okay, we're getting down to the last. I have so much more that I want to talk about tonight, but I don't want to keep you because, again, I will have us here for so much longer. I had another story that I wanted to honor, but I'm not. I'm going to invite you to join me in a moment of collective remembrance. If you feel comfortable, say these names out loud. Say them softly, boldly, whatever feels right to you. If you know other names affected by domestic violence, please just take the time to say or think of those names as well. By speaking their names, we honor their humanity. We hold their memories in our hearts, and we make a silent promise that they will not be forgotten. So I encourage you to also share their stories responsibly. Don't stumble over them like I did tonight, because I've been going so hard. It's just really starting to, it's I'm really passionate about this, and with respect for the family's privacy where needed, we need to commit to raising awareness and not sensationalizing the pain. Um, because every life matters, every name spoken, everyone that is remembered, that is a step toward change. In this space, I believe in this space, your story does not end in pain, it begins in power. Today's episode it's a vital shift from listening and honoring to taking action. Awareness isn't enough. It isn't. Real change comes when communities step up, when we support survivors, when we create a safe environment. If you know anyone in danger, or if you suspect abuse, you can be you can be a lifesaver. Lifesaver. You can save their life, but it must be done with care, respect, and safety for both of you. Both of you and the person at risk, and any children involved. Today, I will share a step, a few steps for supporting those living in domestic violence, and offer resources for how you could become an advocate yourself. So if someone confides with you that they have, they're dealing with domestic violence, or you notice warning signs, you listen to them without judgment. You respect their privacy. Leaving an abusive relationship is complicated, and it must be done on their own time. So do not pressure them. Create a safety plan with them. Help them go through safety documents. One of these episodes, I'm going to talk about the safety plan as well. Gather emergency contacts and help them understand how to do all this discreetly. Learn and know warning signs of escalating danger. Avoid confrontation with the abuser, because that can escalate violence, and it can also put you in danger. Keep communication private and secure. Use safe phones or apps or any clear browsers. Do whatever you can, but do not share their information without their permission. And encourage professional help. Share the National Domestic Violence Hotline. It's 1-800-799-SAFE. 1-800-799-7233. This number connects survivors with trained advocates 24/7 who provides confidential support and resources. So just remember that your role is to support, not to rescue. It's about walking alongside them with respect and with care. And every community has an organization that is designated to help domestic violence survivors, including shelters, counseling centers, legal aid groups, and advocacy programs. And if you can call the domestic violence hotline, they can help you find something in your location. Or you can search online for local domestic violence shelters or support groups. But contact a community center, social service agencies, or places, even places of worship that partner in advocacy support. That's kind of the best way I can give you right now. And then educate yourself. Educate yourself. Please educate yourself. So this is the part of the story where I have to let you guys go. If what you heard touched you today, challenged you, or gave you even a glimpse of hope, I urge you to share this episode, please, widely. With my bumps and all, the facts are there. Share it with your friends, your family, your networks, especially those who may need it the most. And that's not just victims, those are people who want to help. Share it with those struggling in silence right now. Let's flood the spaces around us with stories of encouragement and of survival, because that's how we break the chains of shame and isolation. And while you're at it, please make sure you like this episode, subscribe to my network, Empowered Voices, Finding Strength in Survivors, and watch my show, Insights of a Survivor. Just join our network. And by doing this, you're not only supporting this network, you're investing in a future where every survivor's story is honored, and every voice has power to inspire and to heal. Because healing is not solitary. It should not be done alone. It's a collective process that grows stronger with connection and community. When you listen, share, and engage, you're helping to build a safe space where survivors can feel seen and heard, and where stigma around trauma can finally start to dissolve. This network is for anyone who's ready to move beyond pain and step fully into their truth, their power, and their purpose. As we close, I want to leave you with a powerful quote from, oh, I think I already said this from you, from Monique, who voices herself unapologetically. So if you missed it, you get to hear it again. I want to inspire people to be who they really are, to be courageous enough to be themselves, even if that does mean standing alone. This is the courage that every survivor needs, the courage to face your truth, to stand in your power, and to keep moving forward no matter what the obstacles. So, thank you once again for being a part of Insights of a Survivor. Your journey, your healing, and your voice are the reason this work exists. Keep standing tall, keep breaking free, and keep walking in your truth. Until next time, stay strong, be well, keep healing, keep loving, and keep listening to stories that change lives. Thank you so much, and I will see you next week.